Moving on to the second presentation, we have Commissioner Sam Joe of the Port of Seattle. Well, the Port of Seattle was established in 1911, and he is the youngest commissioner of the port. Please welcome Commissioner Sam Joe. Good morning. Can you see my PowerPoint? I can't see your face, so maybe you might want to turn on your video. Good morning. So, the floor is yours. I believe it's around 2 a.m. in the US, and thank you for joining us at this early hour. Yes, can you see the slides? Yes, we do. I do speak Korean, but I feel more comfortable speaking English, so I'll be speaking in English.
Everyone, my name is Sam Cho. I have the honor of serving as the president of the Port of Seattle Commission and a managing member and chair of the Northwest Seaport Alliance. I'm honored to be here today to present as a nice follow-up to the last presenter on the transition to sustainability and green fuels in the shipping industry. Specifically, I'll be talking about the potential for a green corridor between the Northwest Seaport Alliance, which is the ports of Seattle and Tacoma, and South Korea. Just to give you a little bit of a background and understanding of our structure, the Northwest Seaport Alliance is the premier gateway of the Pacific Northwest region, or the upper left region of the United States. We are the fourth largest container gateway in the United States. First is LA Long Beach, second is New York, New Jersey, third is Savannah, Georgia, and fourth is Seattle, Tacoma. Our governance structure is very unique. The Seaport Alliance is actually governed by the commissioners of the Port of Seattle and the Port of Tacoma. In 2015, Tacoma and Seattle went through a merger, and all container and cargo operations between the Port of Seattle and Port of Tacoma are now operated by a joint venture called the Northwest Seaport Alliance. And therefore, when I refer to cargo operations, I will be referring them within the context of the Northwest Seaport Alliance. First and foremost, I want to establish, make sure we are all understanding what do we mean when we say a green corridor. When we talk about a green corridor, it's a shipping route where zero greenhouse gas solutions are of primary concern between two ports. These green corridors serve as an essential part of the transition towards zero carbon shipping and reaching the goal of zero maritime emissions by 2050 or earlier. And so what is the role of the port's role of a green corridor? First and foremost, we foster collaboration across the maritime and fuel sectors, and we work to partner to establish technological, economic, and regulatory feasibility between two ports, for instance, the Port of Busan and the Port of Seattle. And we help facilitate the accelerated implementation of low and ultimately zero greenhouse gas emission vessels. This slide here actually shows the entire supply chain of what a green corridor looks like. And on the left, you'll see that it starts with fuel production, obviously, and at the end, it ends with our commercial and regulatory enablers and BCOs or end users. And the port really sits to the middle here, as you can see under the pink highlighting. We, on our primary function within a green corridor, will likely be on the logistics and bunkering of these fuels and of these new alternative fuels. Oftentimes in this space, we talk a lot about scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions. And the port can actually help facilitate the transition to green fuels when it comes to scope 2 and scope 3 emissions through some of the logistical bunkering infrastructure that we can build for carriers and ports between two countries. So over the last year, back in November of 2022, I was in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt for COP27, where we announced this green corridor study. which primarily focused on a study of the Green Corridor between Busan, South Korea, and the Seattle-Tacoma port. This study was led by and convened by the Maersk McKinney Moeller Center for Decarbonizing Shipping. It involved, obviously, the United States government, the Korean central government, us at the Northwest Seaport Alliance, the Busan Port Authority, and many, many other think tanks like CRISO and others within the maritime space that provided us very important data in order to assess a pre-feasibility study of whether or not a green corridor would make sense between Busan or South Korea and the Northwest region of the United States. Just to give you a sense of what is trade between the Northwest Seaport Alliance or the Northwest part of the country and Korea look like. The US is Korea's #1 export market, as you all know, and #3 importer market. Korea is the #4 export market for us in the US at the Seaport Alliance and #5 importer. There's significant cargo traffic between the two countries, and 70% of that traffic is all cargo from Busan and Ulsan and the Northwest Seaport Alliance. Later on, you'll find out what kind of cargo we bring in from the Ulsan port. The shipment of vessels between the US and the Republic of Korea is expected to grow substantially in the next 30 or so years. In fact, it's expected to grow between 67 and 90% between now and the year 2050. And over 90% of those vessel shipments will be on container vessels. Those container vessels account for about 60% of trade and commerce between Seattle and the port of Busan. And so when we look at the types of cargo, the top cargo between Seattle and Busan are container ships. Tacoma Busan is bulk carriers, also break bulk, sometimes some people call it. And also Ulsan to Tacoma is ro-ro carriers, so roll on, roll off. They're mostly vehicles like Hyundais and Kia vehicles that are imported through our ports. This is just a illustration of kind of the types of carriers that go to which port. Ulsan, Busan, and Masan, as you can see, are the 3 largest ports that do the most trade volume between our 3 major ports, which is Everett, Seattle, and Tacoma. You can see that break bulk and containers tend to be the biggest ones out of Busan and Masan, but out of Ulsan, it's actually car carriers, and the vehicles, the Hyundais and Kias, are actually mostly going through or Seattle, Tacoma, or Everett. So we have a very diverse range of different types of cargo that go to and from the two regions of the world. This slide illustrates the total carbon emissions by cargo type. You can see by far on the very right that the container volume CO2 emissions is the biggest polluter in our industry right now. Next to that is the ro-ro vessels, so roll-on, roll-off vessels that account for the second most, and then it kind of goes bulk carrier and tankers. And so it will be crucial for us to make sure that we focus on the container ro-ro vessels when it comes to building a green corridor between the two regions of the world. As the last presenter kind of touched upon, the key to a green corridor will actually be the next generation of maritime fuel. And I think you got a very great summary of what the options are, what the most cost-effective measures are or methods are. And I have to agree with a lot of what was said. There's a lot of effort to increase supply of alternative marine fuels. Right now, it looks like in the near term, green methanol or e-methanol is kind of the leader. It's already being bunkered at the port of Ulsan, from what I understand, and many Korea-based shipbuilders are looking towards green methanol. But also, as the last speaker mentioned, ammonia seems to be the most cost-effective and most long-term solution when it comes to lowering greenhouse gases. And so there are many ships in the order book. If you look at the order book for major carriers, a lot of these ships are either e-methanol capable or ammonia convertible vessels. Korea's carrier HMM or Hyundai Metro Marine, I think they just go by HMM now, recently ordered over $1 billion worth of methanol fuel shipped. And if I'm not mistaken, these are between 7,000 and 12,000 TEU ships. They're not the large 22,000 TEU vessels. And so I think they're between 7 and 14,000 TEU vessels. It's very clear that in the long term, that clean methanol will be the long-term solution, most cost-effective solution. And as the last speaker also mentioned, scaling the supply of both green methanol as well as ammonia will be crucial. There currently really isn't a sufficient supply of either of these fuels in order to provide a sufficient amount of fuel for this transition to green fuels. This here illustrates kind of the US and the North American efforts to transition to these greener and better fuels. There are some alternative fuel production projects in the Pacific Northwest that includes everything from biodiesel, renewable diesel, natural gas, and even sustainable aviation fuels. There are several renewable natural gas projects in the Northwest, and blue and green ethanol and ammonia. There's a lot of federal financing currently available for these new fuel infrastructure projects. In fact, the Pacific Northwest just received $1 billion grant from the US Department of Energy to become a clean energy fuel hub for hydrogen. And so this will actually accelerate the Pacific Northwest in terms of its ability to lower greenhouse emissions, both in the maritime, aviation, and really just the transportation sector in general. And so we're very excited to have all these projects underway. The Korea side, however, I must say, is very far ahead. This is an interesting illustration. On the left, you'll see all the readiness projects in the Korean side. And on the right, you'll see all the projects on the US side. And it's color-coded by orange, light blue, and dark blue. And orange actually indicates that it's still in the research or feasibility stage. Light blue indicates in development, and then blue means it's already under deployment. And as you can see, there's a lot more research and feasibility phase or orange shading in the US side. And there's a lot more blue and light blue on the Korea side. So I must admit that Korea is actually far ahead of the US when it comes to readiness at its ports for this green transition. And Seattle, Tacoma, and the United States ports really need to start playing catch up. And this feasibility study has really been an eye-opener for all of us to see how much work and investment we need to put in to make sure that we're keeping up with our partners in South Korea. And so we're really excited to be partnering and looking forward towards the next steps of what hopefully is one of the first wave of the green corridors. And so what is the first wave? The first wave of green corridor is going to be a package of green corridors that the US and Korea will focus, or the world will focus on. In particular, the container route between the Busan Port Authority and Northwest Seaport Alliance is aiming to operate a green methanol facility by the year 2026. We're also looking at the container route between the BPA and the Northwest Seaport Alliance, operating a green ammonia facility by the year 2033, excuse me. And then lastly, between the Port of Masan and Northwest Seaport Alliance, we are potentially looking to operate a green methanol or ammonia refueling facility. And so we are currently finalizing the list of first wave corridors based on this consortium of workshops, and we hopefully will be able to announce and to and undergo readiness of these facilities by the target dates that I just mentioned. Our goal, this is kind of our timeline here. You see that from December of 2022 to today, we did the pre-feasibility study. You see here, Secretary John Kerry and Da Kyung-won here that signed the MOU between the United States and Northwest Seaport Alliance. I was there at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt last year. We are currently in the review, discuss, and decide step. That's going to be between now and the end of the year in December. And hopefully by then we will be at the COP28 conference in Dubai to announce some of our agreements around building a new green corridor. In which case, in 24 we will do a full feasibility study, and then in the end of 2024 we will start discussing the readiness and project build out to create the green corridor after 2025. And so this is kind of our expected timeline between now and the end of 25. We're very excited to be moving forward with some of this effort, and very excited to be working with Busan. One thing that I wanted to mention before I conclude my remarks is that I know that we mostly talk about cargo and shipping in the Green Corridor, but one thing that makes the Port of Seattle unique is that the Port of Seattle actually operates the largest cruise terminal on the West Coast. In fact, this picture here shows you one of our cruise terminals in Seattle. We actually have over 280 calls to the Port of Seattle. We provide over 1.4 million passengers with cruise operations between Seattle and Alaska. It's one of the most popular cruise routes in the United States. And so this is also one of our areas of focus. We are the only port in the United States that is actually doing a green corridor on cruise as well. And so the Port of Seattle is actually involved in two green corridors. One is shipping between South Korea and the Northwest Seaboard Line, but also a green corridor between Seattle and Alaska. And based on our experience with the green corridor in the cruise industry, we know that the ports can be very unique conveners of different parties. I think one of the biggest challenges of decarbonizing our industry in the maritime industry is the fact that we are so fragmented. We are not as consolidated as an industry as, for instance, in aviation. For instance, how many plane manufacturers are there? There's only two. There's Boeing and Airbus. But how many vessel manufacturers are there in the world? There's a lot, right? And that's what's contributing to the difficulty around conforming around the sustainability and the transition to greenhouse gases, is because our industry is so fragmented. And so when you ask yourself, what kind of entity convenes or can bring together everyone? It's ports. And that's exactly what we did at the Northwest Seaboard Alliance at the Port of Seattle when it comes to a green corridor in the cruise industry. We brought everyone together, everyone from the different ports to the different cruise lines to all the different research and development teams and the associations, brought them all to the same table to discuss what a green corridor might look like in the cruise industry. We're very hopeful that as we move forward with the green corridor on shipping and containers between South Korea and the Northwest, that we can do the same and provide that, be that convener for everyone in the industry. So I believe that's the end of my presentation. I really thank you all for the time. It's an honor for me to be able to speak to you all. I hope this one's informative, and I wish you all a good remainder of your conference.
예, 여러분 박수 좀 부탁드리겠습니다.
Commissioner Sam Cho, thank you very much for the great presentation. Well, I've been to Tacoma and Seattle a lot. So these are the two ports. And out of your presentation, well, what was surprising is that containers produce so much carbon emissions. So for green corridors, containers can be something we can focus on. And when it comes to decarbonization, well, you talked about how Korea is ahead of the US in terms of the readiness. So in 2026, when it comes to the green corridor between Busan and the US, how it can be operated on green methanol and how this can be on green ammonia by 2033, and the cruise green corridor between Seattle and Alaska. So that was the vision and the direction. So thank you very much for your message.